Welcome to AI FISEC today, the first and only podcast dedicated to uncover how AI is transforming the physical security industry. I'm your host, Don Marone, and boy, do I have a conversation-rich episode in store for you. In this episode, I brought on guest speaker Igor Olteanu, who's going to share his perspective on where AI meets public safety. Igor is a co-founder and CEO of Volt AI. His career began in the U.S. Army, where he served in the Middle East before transitioning to the tech industry in 2011. This is where he joined Google X, which is Google's research and development division, known for pioneering innovations like self-driving cars and high-altitude balloons. Volt is building the future of safety, proactive AI, protecting people, and pushing the boundaries of what's possible. Founded in Silicon Valley in 2019, Volt AI was born from the combined expertise and shared vision of Igor Olteanu and Dmitry Sokolowski, childhood friends who took different paths before reuniting to revolutionizing security. Dmitry pursued computer science in the University of Maryland, while Igor served in the U.S. Army in the Middle East. Their careers led them cutting-edge roles where Igor worked at Google X, working on moonshot projects, and Dmitry leading AI-driven projects at Amazon, Apple, Uber, and Facebook, including Apple Maps and Uber's AI-powered risk platform. In April 2018, their mission accelerated when an active shooter attacked YouTube's headquarters just miles from their lunch meeting. With their unique blend of military and AI expertise, they saw an opportunity to develop a real-time intelligence system that proactively detects and responds to incidents from violence to medical emergencies. Launched commercially in 2022, AI is a trusted service by Fortune 500 companies, schools, universities, and critical infrastructure, redefining security through proactive AI-driven threat detection. So with that, let's dive into the conversation with Igor. All right, welcome to the podcast, Igor.
Nice to be here.
Nice to have you. So I'm really excited for the topic. You know, what I usually would do is have you go into your intro the way that you see it. And what we're going to talk about today, though, is where AI meets public safety. So usually we talk physical security, but physical security is right in line with public safety. To me, it's now I'm wondering the differences, the core differences. They seem so similar, right? Maybe it's the semantics that AI will help us clarify. So I figured for the audience, why don't we jump in and tell them a little bit more about your background, and we'll just get cracking on the topic.
Sounds good. Would you like me to begin? Absolutely. Well, I guess it's a bit of a different background, unlike most tech founders. Right after high school, I joined the U.S. Army, spent a few years there, including some time in the Middle East. Came back to the DC metro area, got my college degrees. Then was lucky enough to be recruited by Google, which later became Alphabet, into their research and development department, which at that point was fairly new. There was only one building, so it was really cool. Ended up spending 8 years there in the Bay Area. 5 of those were specifically in research and development, working on different things, including Project Loon, that I was one of the founding team members on. And then the last 3 years, I worked as part of the security organizations, looking at primarily risk management and how to apply different technology to physical security, which historically has been very much ignored by advancements in tech, unlike cyber. Back in 2018, one of my best friends, probably the best friend, that was in the Bay Area at the time as well, we're going to go have lunch at one of the Google's buildings in San Bruno when the shooting happened in 2018. Some lady walked in, she was not happy about something, opened fire, hurt a couple of people. And because that was very close to home, I thought that my operational experience could help with it. And I had an idea, and then I ran it by my co-founder, who I knew would kill it if it made no sense technically. But he couldn't kill it, and I couldn't kill it. And we spoke to a couple of people that were respected, that had built companies before, and they couldn't kill it. So said, you know what? Let's try it. This is something that's worth tackling. And if we spend, 3, 5, 7, 10 years, whatever it takes, and even if it doesn't get to the point where we want it to get to, it's still something to be proud of. So we took the plunge. 2019, started the company, and I guess here I am doing podcasts.
Nice, man. Not a bad gig.
Not a bad gig.
You took the plunge. How's the water feel?
Well, how's the water feel? And the same day, it could be very cold and very hot, about 27,000 times. So if you're uncomfortable with the extreme shifts in temperature on a daily basis, you probably shouldn't do it.
Yeah. I could foresee that for sure. Not as enjoyable as like a warm bubble bath or as health relieving as an ice bath, but I could see what you're saying for sure.
I think one of the coolest one of the most relatable things on this is I think on LinkedIn 9 months ago I saw some interview with Sam Altman, and he said it's not that most people don't realize that there's going to be ups and downs in building a company. Significantly underestimate how many ups and downs happen and how frequently they come, and that just jerking back and forth of your emotions on a daily basis from extreme highs to extreme lows, it breaks most people. And again, I'm paraphrasing here, and I think that's what he said. And if I'm confusing something, I apologize. But that's very true. I knew it would get hard. I knew it would take longer and cost a lot more. I had no idea how many times a day you're going to go to extreme highs and extreme lows, and you have to sustain that for weeks, months, years, up until, you know, you either succeed or something else happens. Hopefully succeed.
There's only one way is to succeed, man. There's a book, this is going off tangent a little bit, but there's a book that I have called Burn the Boats. You've heard about it?
Sorry about it. Yeah.
Right. There's only one plan
Yeah.
in order to do that plan.
I think Arnold Schwarzenegger said, there's no point for plan B because it distracts from plan A. I think he said that. The coolest saying that I've heard when I was in the army is that, have a plan and then have a plan for your plan because you're ignorant and your first plan sucks. That's also great.
Hey, man, they're not lying.
They're not lying.
All right, Igor, let's jump in. So I want to start off with the obvious, right? The title. So let's talk about the evolution of AI in public safety. So AI, as we know, it's revolutionizing everything, including public safety, physical security. But how did we get here? Maybe, provide us some context. What kind of major advancements in AI security technology have led to this moment that we're at right now?
I don't know if it's major advancements in AI technology for physical security. I think it's just general advancements. I mean, even if we look back, let's take 10, 15, 20 years ago, in my opinion, one of the reasons that AI was never applied to physical security, it was just too expensive, right? The processing was too expensive. The hardware is too expensive. So people were kind of relying on the traditional way of, guards, gates, and guns, meaning, your badge readers, your cameras, whatever the case may be, and augmenting that by a bunch of people. Hey, we're starting a new building or we're opening a new campus. Well, great, let's bring in people. So the default operating model was that, it's people cost is going to be the largest driver in physical security, because in a lot of cases, you're not hiring your own guards. You're hiring some company that essentially brings guards to you. So there's an overhead cost, like 46% or something more, whatever the case may be, right? But that was still, first of all, it was very comfortable for people who generally come from the same backgrounds, like law enforcement and military and whatever. But also, tech was very, very expensive. And then fast forward, 10 years ago, 5 years ago, even, all of a sudden, you are able to run very sophisticated models, be it in the cloud or be it on the edge. And you can tap into existing cameras and you can deploy very advanced analytics and other things onto existing infrastructure that starts to begin to make financial sense. Now, of course, there's different companies out there. There's some super expensive ones, least expensive ones, very good ones, not very good ones. Are you replacing the cameras completely, or do you already have digital cameras that will support some sort of a server that will essentially take your system from, dumb to smart, for lack of a better term? But I think a lot of that was driven by cost, that now it actually, in a lot of cases, it makes more sense to deploy a smart system that will be your force multiplier. And I would never advocate you can get rid of a bunch of people. No, don't do that, because a lot of the security day-to-day work is customer facing, issuing badges, doing phone calls, helping people that need like special access, whatever the case may be. But what previously took 3, 4, 5 people to do, now one person can do it, right? Because you are augmenting that person with a very smart system that is your force multiplier. And without losing the level of effectiveness of your operations team, actually, I would argue you're actually increasing the level of effectiveness, because you're getting high results more consistently, because you're not dealing with a lot of the human factors like fatigue and differences in training. Monotony doesn't set in, complacency doesn't set in, etc. I kind of went off on a tangent too. I don't know if any of that made sense, but hopefully it did.
No, it totally makes sense. I mean, it's like a lot of technology, right? It always starts expensive over time. A lot of, engineers work to drop down the cost. Cloud, the proliferation of cloud allowed the expansiveness of compute to get down to the low price of a subscription. And even up until today, compute is more powerful than ever and cheaper than ever. And then, not that I'm sure we'll probably cover some of it today, but even some of the generative AI stuff is so cheap to meter that it's like, it's a commodity at some point, they'll run it. And so, yeah, I think it's nice, right? Because I feel like we're in a era, or coming up on an era of AI abundance in some cases. But I still feel like a lot of the challenges still exist in order to realize the value, right? So there's still the age-old conversations of trying to figure out, like, what are your top problems, helping customers prioritize those things so they can prioritize everything else, including budgets and planning, and what do I buy first, right? Because there's a lot of FOMO in this space. A lot of what's the word I've used before? AI seems to have this like omniscient, type of spiritual, I'm going to take over the world. And I think the reality, though, is that from what I've seen, is it's highly task-driven things, highly repetitive, highly mundane things that will take these workers and elevate them to the next level, to get them focused on things that you said. I agree 100% on the things that matter, things like customer service, driving relationships, or leading with empathy, creating real human connections. This is the stuff that we're supposedly good at, right? I wonder, though, over years where we've waited for the technology to get more democratized and available, if we've lost a lot of that, where we have to get back to the basics of who we are as, humanity. And I know that is my tangent. And you are welcome to reflect on that or not, and we can go on to the next thing. But I was just commenting that I think what you're saying is spot on, and I would hope that most people would also agree with that.
Well, I mean, I agree from building products to using those products. I mean, there's a big difference between building a product, building tech for tech's sake, or building an actual tool, right? Are you building a gadget or are you building a tool? And same thing with users. I mean, I know plenty of people that I use GenAI for this, and I use this tool for that. And it's like, okay, great, but how's that making your life better? Like, have you actually found a way to do more tasks in a period of 24 hours? Well, no, not really. I'm still trying to figure out. And then I know other people that I just spoke. There's one that I was actually, the way we met is that I was on his podcast, and he's an investor, great guy, and we caught up afterwards. And he's just saying, all the things that he accomplishes. And I'm just looking at it, and I asked him, I was like, how in the world do you accomplish all that? He goes like, well, like I'm just, most of the stuff that I do is using AI, but he does it very differently. He knows what he wants AI to do, what he doesn't want AI to do. And the stuff that he wants AI to do, he doesn't do it because it's cool. He optimizes it to such a level with a very specific mission, right? To find more time in the day to accomplish more things, right? That's a very different thing. Even when talking to customers, when they see our tool, because it just looks and feels so different, and we did that on purpose, I'm sure, we'll go into that a little bit later. They look at us like, well, we've never seen this, but it kind of makes sense. And I told them, well, because this was the design. Now it's all pretty and cool because of my co-founder, because he's awesome. But the first down and dirty design was not imagined by a tech guru. It was imagined by a guy that did operations for most of his life, right? Meaning that it was a tool that I would use if I had to respond to a problem, right? Enterprise security or law enforcement would have to respond if, God forbid, something happened and they used the customer used my tool to transfer that real-time intel to whoever responds. So kind of just naturally fit in, because if you do the job and you know that it might be ugly, it might be buggy, something might not be perfect in the first few years of it, but this is your mission, right? And you're going to do that mission to the best of your abilities, and everything else comes secondary.
That reminds me of? It reminds me of just knowing what you want, like basically being a leader, right, in the company. So imagine if you give ambiguous directions, or if you had things that you said, I just need to have people, but they don't have a clear job description or clear performance indicators on what would success look like. And, you can't realize the potential of those people ever. How could they? Because they're not set up that way, And so, what we're saying is, like, people are their own leaders of AI. And so that they make even just the decision to buy, not the build version, but to buy, they have to be leaders in that decision to say, how do I use this as a tool, right, than just as a cool.
Absolutely. There's a cool story on that. Again, because I worked at Google X, I was fortunate enough to work with some very smart, talented, and
I'll bet.
in a lot of cases, famous people. And one of the people actually had the opportunity to know personally and work with Steve Jobs. And we're friends to this day, and he's an awesome dude. And I remember early brainstorming sessions about, like what would the first like MVP would actually look like. And he stopped everybody. He says, hey, I'm going to tell you guys a story. And goes, Steve apparently, and again, I don't know Steve, I've never met Steve, but this is what he told me. So Steve apparently was very notorious at like walking in and saying, what is this thing? And he would get some very, elaborate explanation. He goes like, what is this thing designed to do? Right? And somebody would say like, well, it's designed to do X, right? And then you look at the person and go, so why the F doesn't it do that? If you've designed the thing to do one thing right, it should do, the first thing that it should do is that thing right. Because if you did everything else corrected, but it doesn't do that one thing, you failed at your job, right?
Makes me wonder how much he knew what he was going to ask before he came in, or he just came in just guns a-blazing, just ready just to turn it up,
Sometimes I really do think that like guys like Steve and guys like Elon, they're like engineered in some lab to be like these superhumans. Because I have no idea how they do that, and they come up with the stuff that they do come up with.
Seriously, they definitely set the bar in an unreachable area. So let's continue the conversation around AI and public safety, right? So traditional surveillance. So it's relied on human monitoring a lot of times. And so where does AI fill that gap or the gaps, and how does it enhance existing security infrastructure?
Doesn't matter how many cameras you have, doesn't matter how good those cameras are, doesn't matter how great your analytics are, you will never be able to have enough people to be at the right place at the right time all the time. Even take 50 cameras, right? If your organization only needs 50 cameras, it means that the budget that you have for physical security, because it is a cost center, it doesn't make you money in most cases, is going to be such that you'll probably, if you're lucky, you'll have one guard, right? And again, I look back at Google, all the money in the world, and we were still running out of people essentially because there was constantly new buildings coming up. But so what are the chances of the person actually looking at 50 screens? So let's say you have some amazing, we can get 5 camera views by 5 camera views. You got 25 cameras, right? You have a very big screen, and it shifts between the first 25 and second 25 on a constant basis. So how long do you think it will take for that person to go completely complacent? Or do you really believe that, let's say you have 3 shifts, let's say 5 shifts to account for days off and to account for no-shows and whatever? Do you really think that the person is going to sit for 8 hours and look at every single screen? And even if they do look at every single screen, by the time they get to screen number 25, it could be 7 minutes that have passed and something already happened. If you look at FBI statistics, I think they say that most critical incidents are 3 minutes or less, something like that, if I'm not mistaken. So how do you solve that problem? Well, we need more people. Okay, fine. So you're not going to run 8-hour shifts. You're going to do 2-hour shifts, right? Still too long for a monotonous job. But now, all of a sudden, your security team is going to cost you a crazy amount that nobody will ever be able to approve. So how do you solve that? Well, have them focus on the customer-facing tasks that cannot be automated, at least not now or anytime soon, in my opinion, if you do it right. But give them a force multiplier that can. Same thing with patrols. They call them, roving patrols or rovers. All right, cool. You're going to hire a bunch of folks that are essentially going to walk around the perimeter of your facility or walk around the indoor perimeter of your building from room to room, hallway to hallway, right? What are the chances that they are going to be at the right place at the right time all the time? Again, it's slim to none because you're not going to have an army of people to cover everything. Instead, right, why can't you have a system that already has access to all your cameras, understands the dynamics of your indoor spaces by using, let's say, a 3D model? So when something does happen, you can actually pinpoint exactly where it's happening, right? And if that incident is dynamic, meaning that it's moving through the area, you can track that. So now you can take a resource that you have and point them into where the problem currently is and not necessarily where it began. And because you're continuously collecting the data of, well, which facilities are more prone to problems, which facilities are less prone to problems, is the location of my on-site resources Are they in San Francisco, even though all the problems are happening in San Jose? Or are all my resources in San Jose because all the problems are happening in San Jose?
Right.
So all of a sudden, you can get away with a lot less people that can respond much faster just because you have the information necessary for you to utilize those resources in a lot more efficient and effective way. AI has been crucial for that because without AI tying into, cameras are your eyes essentially, right? Tying into that and continuously reading the patterns of movement of people and as much activity is happening and the number of incidents, the type of incidents that are happening, you can't really get proper data in order to to give you a better chance of higher success of making the correct decisions in order to really utilize the team to the most effective way for us.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with that. One of the things you started with was attention. And I would argue, not in a heavy way, because it's not for today or a debate, the human attention has actually gotten like way worse, I would say. So with all of the, you look at your phone, people spend, I actually looked this up the other day. I think millennials on average spend about 4 to 5 hours on their phone a day. And then Gen Zs go up to 8 hours a day. And it's horrible, right? So, but what happens on the phone is there's so many things that happen on that phone between social media notifications and email and messaging. So the list goes on. And so, and I think that it's a problem, right? We look towards these operators, let's say in this case in public safety, that's keeping schools or cities safe. And, to assume that their attention is going to get better, I think would be wrong for those reasons. The other thing is also, I think you mentioned effectiveness or something around effectiveness. So AI is really good at detecting patterns, and there's a lot of consistency with that and its predictions. But every operator, the human operator, will have different levels of performance. Maybe you have a Mensa and this guy or gal can pick up on anything. He sees it and he has his intuition that maybe no AI can figure out. But on the other end of the spectrum, you have someone that's fallen asleep, not paying attention, right? Even if they recognize a crime, they couldn't do it if it was spelled out in front of them, and everybody in between. So I think between attention and between effectiveness, there's a lot of issues with trying to, like you were saying, throwing people at trying to resolve public safety and security as opposed to just leveraging the technology for what it's meant to do, which I think sounds like is to action people. Basically they just tell me about the patterns. They tell me about what's going on, tell me about where it's happening, go action the officer to go on site to go do their thing or go investigate, rather than trying to do everything that is prior to that.
Sure. And it's a numbers game, right? Like the chances of you getting some super high speed motivated Navy SEAL versus some college kid that is just, is there to essentially pay through college or grad school or whatever. Like, what are the chances? Of course, it's on the other end of the spectrum where you're probably going to get somebody who does not look as being a security guard as a career, right? So with that, and again, there's a lot of stuff that we picked up, including security guards, right? They will think about everything under the sun, the homework, the exams, the midterms, the fight with their significant others, whatever. But they will not think about specifically that every single day. They might do it in the beginning for a few hours because they're new, right? But afterwards, complacency sets in. And every day nothing happens, the more complacency sets in, more complacency sets in. And finally, when it does happen, there's a reason why most of this stuff goes unnoticed. And there's a reason why historically these cameras, it's been an investigative tool where they have to go back, pull the video, and actually see what happened. Hopefully learn a lesson, right? And hopefully implement that into some sort of a training or implementation of different SOPs to try and reduce the chances of it happening ever again. So if you use the right tech, right, hire the right caliber people, pay them well, that are very good at customer service, that are very good at critical thinking, right? Human brain is designed for, and then let them focus on that, but put that white net using AI and let them monitor the monotonous stuff, catching those patterns. So when something does happen, put it front and center. And now this person is not overloaded, over the past 7 hours, but 25 different false positive incidents, and their brain is boiling. But this person is actually doing very critical tasks and very focused on it. And when something does come front and center, that is a real problem, they're able to react and actually use those critical thinking skills and that customer service that they were hired to solve the problem.
I love it. I love it. So AI has been used for security in years. We know that. Obviously, machine learning has been around since the 50s, and we've been using this stuff for quite some time. But what's the difference now, right? Like, how have improvements in real-time processing, for example, or automation changed in some way, or what's different now that customers and anyone in the industry should be paying attention to?
User friendliness,
Okay,
aside from cost. I
that's a
mean, look,
big one. We build a lot of clunky stuff in this industry, so that's a big one.
I'm not an engineer. I never was. I never pretend. I think for a second there after I left the army with my co-founder when he was still at University of Maryland, I kind of said, hey, maybe I'm going to be an aerospace engineer. He goes like, really? Really going to do that? Here's the math requirements for it. And I looked at that and I'm like, nope. And I closed it and I realized I'm not doing it because I understood my strength and my weaknesses. I
Right,
think
right.
it was pretty dumb, but I was smart enough to understand that. But now the way a lot of these tools, like, this is one of the most complicated things that you can build, and a 3-year-old without training can use it, right? And the beauty about a lot of these AI products now, and like even something as difficult as like enterprise tools with the Gen AI that is being implemented into that, it becomes so easy to use, right? And
Natural.
now natural, exactly. And now you have, my mother, because she's a great woman, but she's not exactly, a super user of, AI tools. She knows how to use it because you simply tell it what to do. And we have a couple of really cool things that are becoming, that we're going to be launching to our customers that will kind of prove what I'm saying right now. But if you make the usability of your product so easy that even, somebody like me, aka dumb, can use it, right? It means everybody can use it. And it means that the system itself won't allow you to make mistakes. You'll be like, I want to do this. Well, are you sure you want to do this? Maybe you should do this. Oh, yeah, that sounds like a great idea. I should do that. Fantastic. Do that. Right. And AI is absolutely capable of doing that. So, of course, it becomes more attractive to
Did you
people.
take this ease of use from your time before this job? Like, so did you take that belief from like Google and, the folks that knew Steve Jobs? Did you take that from them? And what was a big thing that you took away from that of why that's so important now? What did you take away from them in the past?
Well, the easy use, I really took it from the military because I was a young kid when
Okay.
I joined the military, and the whole idea came when in my time in the military. My time in the Middle East, one of the things that we had to do is that we would have to go into different objectives and essentially, clear those objectives. We would have to go in and do various tasks depending on what our command would tell us to do. And I remember thinking about it, in my non-tech brain, but as a kid that loved sci-fi movies, would think it would be great if I had some sort of a device and now we could just throw, through a window, or in most cases, in that case, like a hole in that wall, and get an immediate snapshot, like an immediate hit signature of understanding the layout of the indoor spaces and to see if there's any hit signatures inside. That alone would 100x the effectiveness of the job because we know what we're walking into, right? Um, but then fast forward, and some of the tools that were released to us, everything from, Blue Force trackers to they were called. But anyway, there's a bunch of tools that were given to us. The tools that would get used the most were the tools that it was pretty much impossible to screw up, right?
Hmm.
It was the easiest ones where you press one button, or like if you press one button, it doesn't work, you press the second button, and it begins to work, right? Those were the tools that everybody loved, right? If when we were given a tool that came with a set of directions and you had to do this and you had to that, if it didn't work, you had to open another set of directions and debug it. In most cases, it just collected dust somewhere in the back of the Humvee and nobody ever touched, right? So when I went to, again, years later after school and at Google, it was the same principle. Like when we would start projects, I remember the first payloads that we built for Google Loon, which are high altitude balloon payloads. The engineers, very talented, very smart engineers, would have to build it. And we quickly realized that it's not scalable because we did not have the budget to hire all the engineers that we wanted, right? But we needed an operations team that would handle everything that's non-engineering. So the engineers, the founding engineers, were forced to dumb down that payload building process to such a way that somebody like me could build it, a person that has never built payloads for anything that flew. And you know what? They did. And then I ended up building payloads for a little bit. because they got it to a very user-friendly process. And that allowed us to advance to the next step and the next step in that entire project without actually hiring more people and blowing the budget ahead of time. Synchronous?
I love it. I mean, it sounds like you being resourceful really kind of helped lead in, or at least complement the importance of user friendliness. And who doesn't want something that's the button, right? I mean, I think that's what generative AI at least, is trying to represent itself today. And I think that the closer we get, the more interesting that becomes. I mean, there's still plenty of work to be done. It's plenty of human capital that's a high value, and something that eventually, over time, yeah, as the products get easier, it just makes sense that you would get more adoption, more interest, less pushback from using technology, or just buying it in general as a first step. So yeah, I can appreciate that. So I want to talk a little bit about some of the. And now you mentioned you're not in a tech space, so we can answer this however you want. But so we look at from AI powered threat detection and response. So AI, we know, can detect unusual behavior, whether it's using probabilistic machine learning or some other mechanism to do that, unauthorized access, abandoned objects, and real time, etc. But could you break down simply how these detection systems work, right? So for our audience, we have people that have been in the industry for a long time. We get people that may be end users to the product, right? So in their perspective, they're just like, hey, I just use it. Uh, but it'd be kind of cool to talk a little bit about, if you're able to, just to break down how these detection systems work on a most basic level.
And by the way, I am in tech. I've been in tech since 2011. I'm just not an engineer, right?
Fair enough.
That is something
Like,
that I'm very proud of.
If you worked at Google, anything goes, right? So yeah,
I just knew my limitations, and I always knew when to surround myself by people. Well, always surround yourself by people that are smarter than you. But like I get to a certain level of technical proficiency, and they're like, nope, we need other people to do this.
I'm the same way.
That's awesome. So the way it works, right? I mean, I assume you don't want me to go into like the data sets of the models. That's pretty self-explanatory.
Sausage making's down here, and the sausage is up here, probably like right there.
Okay, cool. So let's assume that most people that are looking to upgrade their physical security installed their cameras in the past, let's say 10 years, meaning that all those cameras are IP cameras that sit on the network, so you can connect to them. So you can go into their existing server racks where they have their VMSs, and you can put in a server, right? And plug into their cameras using RTSP streams or whatever, right? That's one of the way to do it. Another way is direct to cloud. Now, of course, there's a limitation to that, meaning that it's highly dependent upon the infrastructure that the customer has. If the networks could support the up and down speeds that we need in order to reliably run 50, 100, 500 cameras, whatever the case may be, then a direct-to-cloud deployment would make sense. If not, then probably an edge deployment would make sense. In reality, most customers have some sort of a hybrid system where some buildings are direct-to-cloud and some buildings are edge. Some customers are their security policies are such that they don't want an on-cloud deployment, right? They want everything to be on the edge. So again, there's also that for various reasons, but that's in terms of the infrastructure. Then we get connected to that. What else do we need? Well, like I said, we have a very different system from a usability perspective, meaning that our system does not focus on many screens that then get analyzed to give you a lot of data about what those cameras are seeing. Everything is centered around 3D geolocation. Because again, the idea behind the system was let the system do 80+% of all the work. And if a problem does happen, let's give the most critical real-time intel to whoever needs to manage it and or respond to it. But what do you need to know? What's happening? Where is it happening? Is it static or dynamic? I.e., is it there? Is it moving? And that means stitching together of the video across all the cameras that are seen if it is moving, right? Plus geolocation. And the change in geolocation, breadcrumbs or however we want to do it, if that changes. Let's focus on that, which means that the first thing, we take their floor plans, various different formats and accuracy levels, and we create 3D models. So once we actually start, a building goes operational, you have all the cameras are connected to our brain, let's call it the vault brain, through one of those two types of architectures. And then you have a live 3D model of your facility in your outdoor spaces, all the cameras are placed, You have full situational awareness of your facility, which zones are restricted, which ones are not. All the cameras understand the locations of each one of the cameras. Every camera understands what it's seeing, and also understand what all the other cameras are seeing. So now the system's ready to go. And at this point, the customer has the ability to essentially go in and set the rules. And I'm not talking about manual configuration on every camera. We wanted to get away from that stuff. That's way too complicated and time consuming. But you pick a zone and say, hey, this zone I worry about, unauthorized visitor. This zone I worry about fights. This zone I worry about loitering, vandalism. This zone I worry about, car accidents, whatever. And then you just click on the zone and all the cameras get pre-configured to that particular rule set, right? Uh, the really cool thing, and this I don't take credit for this is my co-founder, but even if you don't set any zones, like the system begins to, because of the way that we've designed this, it constantly looks at the flow of people through time and space, right? So it begins to essentially create real-time risk profiles, understanding what is normal, what is abnormal, right? 10 people get up and run in one direction, probably shouldn't happen unless it's like a high school gym at 12 p.m. where people do gym class, right? If in our office, where I sit right now, somebody shows up at midnight and starts walking around the office, that's an anomaly because nobody should be here, especially in the summer when they kill the AC after 5 p.m., right? But things like that, even if you do absolutely nothing, the system will begin to send you what it believes to be anomalous. And the more feedback you give the system and the more time the system spends and actually understands your camera views and the actual view of your operation, the more accurately it begins to identify anomalies. And that back and forth communication between the customer as well as we have an operations team. Actually, we have two operations teams that are validating the most difficult incidents. So think of our system as like 3 layers of validations that happen very quickly. So there's an AI model that essentially gets the data and it goes like, okay, cool. So I have a very high level of confidence, for the sake of argument, let's say I have over 90% of confidence that this is a real incident. That gets escalated because we don't want to send any false positives. Let's say that it goes, hey, I have 60% confidence that this is a real incident. Then it goes through a second layer of validation, right? And it goes, well, is it? It's like a more advanced validation thing. Okay, cool. Now we have over 90% confidence. Send it to the customer. Because again, the goal is not to be the boy that cries wolf and send them a bunch of false positives and just annoy them with sensory overload. Now, the most difficult ones, that second level goes, well, I'm still not sure. I'm still at 60%. Then it goes into our team of operators that their entire job is not to watch cameras. Their job is to validate this thing. It pops up on their screen and it goes, okay, cool. It says weapon detected. Is this a weapon or not a weapon? And then the person has, our SLA is 30 seconds, right? So the person has 30 seconds. We'll strive for 15, but it's 30. They are allowed up to 30 seconds. Is it a weapon? Is it not a weapon? Nope, it's a cell phone. Boom, dismiss it. The customer never sees that noise. It goes into the training queue to improve the accuracy of our model. Right? Person down. Is this person down or are they actually stretching? Well, you look down. Oh, nope, they're moving. They're actually down. They're not supposed to be laying down in that lobby. Person down, escalated. So it gets escalated to the customer. So all of that happens in near real time. So some of our, if the human is not involved, it gets escalated very quickly. If the human is involved, it still gets escalated quickly. But it could be, 15, 20 seconds later. That allows us to also get continuous feedback of what is real, what is not real, again, improving the accuracy of our models. And the way that Dimitri engineered this, which is awesome, is that let's say that even that fails. It's like a triple redundancy. And the human, for some reason, makes a mistake. If the system believes that the human makes a mistake, that goes immediately to another operator, not this operator, a different operator, for another validation, right? So there's so many checks and balances built into this process that, never say never, but we strive for zero false positives. And in some cases, when false positives happen, it's because there's some gaps in communication between the SOPs that the customer has and the SOPs that they communicated to us, meaning that, hey, I don't want you to escalate anytime there's a forklift between the hours of 3 p.m. and 5 p.m. on a Saturday, right? And then all of a sudden, right, there's a forklift on a Sunday, and we're like, okay, cool, escalated. They're like, hey, I told you, don't escalate this. Just like, what do you mean? You said Saturdays, this is Sunday. No, 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 we meant Saturdays and Sundays. Technically, it's a false positive because they got something they shouldn't have gotten. But it's typical a break in the communication of their SOPs to us.
I love it. I think one of the things that really stuck out to me earlier when you were saying was that customers don't need to know how to configure cameras. They just need to know that I'm interested in this area. And it goes back to your usability or ease of use perspective. And I think that's the way all these things should be. It's like, hey, their outcome is in their language, which is in like most people's language, simple. And they've got a goal that they want to accomplish with these tools, as opposed to like, hey, I need to dial to the camera. I need to know, frame rates, and I need to know what streams I'm pulling, what substream is going here or there, blah, blah, blah. And although that's not really that complicated, it's just something else that customers have to deal with, right? And as they exchange operators or personnel, because we know the security departments tend to have higher turnover, that's not something that they need to have to do. And so I love that. Even though it sounds like it might be specific for Vault, I think it sounds pretty cool because it goes back to, it's tying into what you were saying earlier. So let me ask this question. So how does let's talk about anomaly detection for a second. Like, how does AI-driven anomaly detection compare to traditional motion detection and rule-based security alert?
It's simple. You have a camera, a bird flies by. Will it trigger recording? It
Motion
probably
detection.
will, right?
Yeah.
Do you really care that a bird flew, or like the light changed, the light came on, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like all of that is completely useless, right? So why are you notifying me of all this motion, right? No, only notify me when that motion makes sense. And that's another thing. It's like, okay, cool. If the light changed, do I want to know? No. If there's a spider that crawled by my lens, right? Do I need to know about that? No. A tree went through the window. Do I need to know about it? Absolutely, right? Oh, that's probably the best way that I can explain how traditional motion detection on cameras differs from it. But again, AI, if you do it right, because if you go to like an IC West or whatever, there's a ton of people that do, smart AI for physical security. But essentially, it's the same motion detector. No, there's some great companies that do this very well, and they take a very different approach than we do because they believe that will win the market in the long term. But there's a bunch of them that essentially is just motion detection. It's like, we can identify people. Great. Every time you see a person, notify me. Fantastic, right? An office can have 1,000 people at any given moment, so you're notifying them of what exactly?
Every time. So let's go off that if you don't mind. So I think one of the things, I think you mentioned something there. So one of the things that AI has been doing is to the people in cars, right? It's like that's the commodity AI. But from your experience and what you've seen, what is something interesting that it's detecting that's not those things? Because like you said, like snooze fest. Now it's a person that's there at a random time. They shouldn't be. That's interesting. Fair, right? So it's still using people to do something or to tell something to tell the system something else. But what are some other things that you think is pretty cool that you've seen that the AI can detect other than just the classic, I see a person, I see a car, I see dead people. I don't know. Like, which one is it?
I love that movie, by the way. Bruce Willis is awesome.
Yeah, Bruce Willis is awesome.
Yeah. Now, I'll tell you some of the cool things that we do that other companies have tried and not me. Well, I don't know of any that actually succeeded as well as we did, but maybe somebody did and I'm not aware. Fight detection or bullying, because our largest sector by far is education, K through 12, public and private, as well as colleges and universities. Something that we work very hard on is fights/bullying. Well, how do you detect fights and bullying and differentiate it from dancing or people, playing hacky sack? I don't know if the kids still do that, high schools, but like, how do you differentiate that? And if you're asking me, I'm the wrong person to tell you how, because if I knew how, I would probably be the technical co-founder in that industry, right? But they figured it out, and they looked at the body position within certain times and a lot of data and a lot of videos of what the difference between people playing around versus people actually fighting. And there was a lot of testing that we did, first in our dev portal, then at a limited scale within certain selected customers that knew this is going to be buggy, but they knew that it was important enough for them to play around with it, essentially to give us feedback on it. And now we're able to do that. And we've caught It really sucks, when you catch something like that and you see that, a bunch of bullies are messing with some kid and like throwing them in, I don't know, in some closet or porta potty or whatever the case may be. But the system catches that, right? And it doesn't catch it when they're just playing around. People down, that's another thing. Well, people say, well, we can detect people down. Well, can you? Can you differentiate between people stretching or doing yoga versus actually being down, people sleeping versus actually being down? We can. And we've had instances where, you know, cleaning staff, one particular example comes to mind. Cleaning lady hit her head on a sharp ledge and she was down in front of a bunch of cameras. And the security guard sitting in another building, right? Nobody knew. If it wasn't for our system, I don't even want to think about what could have happened. But the system caught it immediately, realized that the person was down, notified, and she got help immediately. 911 was called in. So, yes, the person got injured, unfortunately, right? But when that happened, she got the help that she needed. Instead of laying there, God knows for how many hours, God knows what consequences. Even for that person, that employee, that's a very different experience. And all of that is done because of a piece of tech that is designed to protect people.
You find there's so many, and I've seen this happen, I won't name any specific companies, but they type in something and random, and the AI just picks it up. And I can't help but think that that's probably Gen AI at work. And so I'm curious from your perspective, do you find there's a future, or even today, where the development of all kinds of different detection capabilities is going to be enhanced by generative AI, for example? I'm not going to say other forms or more advanced forms because that's too ambiguous. But do you find that there's a future that it will help speed up the development to most kind of, let's say, semantic detection? Like if I'm looking for a lady that's in a fight in a purple coat or something like that, or what's your thoughts on that?
Oh, I mean, I have like four different thoughts on that. So first of all, if you already know that it's a lady in a purple coat fighting, which means that you know that it's happening and you know where it's at, you shouldn't be looking for it, right?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
GenAI can absolutely help you with historic data, like saying, hey, like, please show me, all the cars in that parking garage within a certain day instead of actually, it shows, well, just the white cars, right? Like, and it changes that for sure. In real time, if you already know what's going on, you don't need a tool, right? You need to send that information to whoever needs to go and resolve that problem. By the way, there's a lot of companies, and there's some very good companies that can identify like 300-400 different risk triggers, pretty much everything under the sun. We never wanted to do that approach for two reasons. First of all, who cares if you can identify cups, tables, and chairs? Like, can you actually identify that has the potential of driving risk that or potential actually affecting?
So it's like what's under the risk umbrella. Yeah.
Like, focus on what is actionable. Don't focus because it's cool and you can tell your marketing people that you can detect 500 things. Right. When it comes to safety and security incidents, unactionable information can actually be damaging, in my opinion. But because of that, it's also going to drive the cost of your compute down, the cost of your hardware down. So you can actually provide a system that is affordable to more customers instead of, here's the thing that can detect 500 different things. Before we get started, you owe me, $500,000 of servers. That will only attract certain customers. It may be the most phenomenal system in the world, but you're kind of other people that may really need your system may not be able to afford it, right? Now, to go back to your, hold on, there's another thing. Also, the way we do detections, for example, a lot of customers, every single customer that went on board will have a regular cadence of meetings of what's working well, what's not working well, what is the system not doing that it should be doing. And pretty much everybody say, hey, can you detect this? Can we detect that? We always have a back and forth conversation to understand not what they want to detect, but why they want to detect it. What problem are they trying to solve?
Sure. Yeah.
Dimitri is amazing at that stuff. And sometimes we'll suggest other solutions that may be better than just another data set. But in a lot of cases, they say, okay, cool. You want to detect large animals because you have operations in Alaska and you're afraid of wolves, right? For example. Okay, cool. That directly deals with the health and safety of people. We're going to prioritize that, put it in, a sprint that is coming up next, and we're going to release it fairly quick. Versus you want to detect, I don't know, blue shirts on hangers, right? And you're like, cool, how does that affect your risk profile? No, but we really want it because our employees, that they really want that stuff. Great, but we'll explain why that might take 12 plus months right? Because it's just it doesn't fit on the priority list of criticality for us. And I just give, of course, I gave you a ludicrous example. Can
No,
Gen
yeah,
AI in the future help with those developments? Probably, but I'm not smart enough to figure out how to do that.
so, and I think the wolf example is a lot better than the one that I gave. And that's it. And then I think it's exactly what I'm talking about, right? So I've had probably 2 years ago, I remember I had a customer that is one of the largest blood donors in the country. And they wanted to be able to track plasma bags because if one gets lost, there's a pandemonium that exists. They can lose their license to serve in that community, all kinds of problems, right? Well, the issue is, so each plasma bag will come in with some information on it, but we're not able to. At first I was like, hey, let's do an RFID tag on those, and then maybe even a QR code or something that a camera could pick up and could recognize. That seems like a pretty simple thing that we could do. Well, no, they cannot put anything on the bag. So what do we do with that, right? Well, at the time, the camera company that I was working with on this, they were like, well, I mean, it's hard for us to develop something that's like a rectangle, you know, but here's the thing, it's not, but see, that was before Gen AI. So the rectangle isn't just a rectangle. It's a rectangle that's a certain color. It's got fluid in it, you know, it maybe has something on top, right, that gives it like maybe a tag of some sort. So there's some identifying markers that make it more than just a rectangle. And so what I'm saying is I think that when customers come with these one-offs, that I wonder in the future where Gen AI can make that much more easy to get to. And maybe it's like a custom thing that they end up creating, but I think there's a real future that could happen. And I don't know that it's so much realistic. Now I wonder how that's going to get modeled to them. I don't know if it's going to happen on edge. It certainly can. A lot of these, vision models, things are shrinking. It seems like more practical. But that was more my line of question is we have customers that have, that might have these random things that they need to detect all the time. Cameras can do a lot of work, but there's a development issue. And so the question is, could Gen AI help with development? I would answer that directly in one way. The answer is yes, because look at GitHub Copilot. That uses Gen AI to code, right? It's actually helping coders speed up development a lot. I think even Meta mentioned that their mid-level engineers are going to be replaced by coding, right? That's generative AI. It's not machine learning. And so I think there's definitely a future of that, but I do wonder how long it would take us to get there as an industry. So that was more my line of questioning.
I could do a little bit of an argument if you have for us for about
Fair?
3 minutes on that. In the example that you gave, in my opinion, the critical point of failure, it's not the speed that it takes to develop the model. The critical point of failure in that case, it's the hardware, the cameras. Because if you, I mean, think about it this way, right?
Interesting. Yep.
Let's take two scenarios. We have a small room like this, right? That has 4 cameras, right? The walls are green, the floor is white, I'm wearing black. The cameras are new, virtually constant light. When the natural light goes away, the unnatural lights up, but it's a small room, there's a lot of light, right? And there's typically no more than 2 or 3 people in this room that move fairly slowly. Whatever you want to detect here, you will detect. It is that good. You can probably detect when my hair is getting too long, right? Now, let's take a stadium, right? You have a camera that is 200 feet away, one of them. You have during rush hour thousands of people that are flowing through it. The walls are gray, the floors are gray. They're wearing mostly gray, so there's not a lot of contrast in that, right? The lenses are super old, sunburned. God knows when was the last time they cleaned it. So everything that I'm talking about, the amount of cameras, the angles, how far they're deployed, the contrast of what we're trying to detect, the amount of volume of objects that is moving and at what speeds, and how big those objects are. If you try to detect, that bag in that environment, it's not the Gen AI thing, right? It's the fact that you just don't see it, because in order for the Gen AI to see it, even if it has a very big data set, right? It did that, but the camera is seeing something and it can't figure out what it's seeing.
Right.
So
environmental seems like there's some considerations, but I see cameras live in a 2D world though, right? So what happens when we move into a world model where it sees in a 3D? Now this is future stuff, right? So this is something that I or you can't predict, obviously, and this is not your scope in your company. but we're talking future tense, which actually is the last section we should probably dive into. And so things that may or may not exist. It's no surprise, though, and this is good reasons why you're looking to get into more of the tech community from going from Bethesda, is that they are way ahead of the security industry in so many ways. Like I thought that general purpose robots were going to be so far away, and it's a conversation in my household. And once NVIDIA opened up, their world model digits, then things started to change, right? With my perception around it. And also the size of compute started to change. They're doing these little supercomputers for like $3,000 that look like a small bridge that a camera's probably stream into. I don't know. And so I think like the imagination is like is I would say around the development of this space is a real useful area, as opposed to before it was like, well, that's probably not going to happen. It's like pie in the sky. And I'd be really shocked. It's almost, in my mind, it's almost like anything goes. If they can get into general purpose robots, then it's like, they can definitely crush cameras. You know what I'm saying? At some point. Cameras like small meat potatoes next to like a robot walking around your house doing your laundry.
But look, I lived in Mountain View when what was the name? The Night Scope, I think, when they did the big eggs that were rolling around.
Yeah.
There was like a Taco Bell right off a shoreline, and sometimes I'll hit that before going home. And their office was like probably 2 blocks inside the neighborhood. That's where those robots were rolling around. And I thought it was super cool, right? So when they started getting deployed, there were stories like of them falling into fountains. I don't know if they're true or not, but the stories were just funny. And everybody was like, well, they kind of suck. I was like, okay, cool, they suck, but they're doing something nobody's ever done before. Like, you're not supposed to be an expert. That's something nobody's ever done before. And now, fast forward, 10, 15 years, and like everything that we're seeing with drones and dogs and track robots, it's definitely progressing. Even going back to the camera and the 3D thing, right? As an example, why do those cameras have to be fixed in one place? What if they're flying cameras, right? What if they're so small and so quick that they're constantly flying that all of a sudden they do create a 3D view of your entire facility, and now it doesn't matter how far or how close you are, the amount of people, you can detect something as small as barcodes and liquid and the changes of color and all that other stuff. And look, I think it's a matter of time before we're going to get there, because physical security finally is beginning to take technology seriously, like cybersec has been doing for decades.
Oh, yeah.
So I think it's going to be really cool to see like the type of stuff that is going to come up in the next decade.
Well, you're definitely in the right space, right? And that's why you're here. We have a lot of the companies we've had have been the first to develop AI agents within their platform, and continue to progress. And I think that certainly Volt's no exception to that. And so let's wrap up again with the future, right? So we talked about some crazy stuff for about 10 minutes there. Maybe that's a beer, maybe that's a different time, but I definitely go down rabbit holes because this is a part of my life. A lot of the listeners might not know how much time I pay attention to the AI space, but I do. I gave up sports because it's so much information. Yeah, man. So in any case, so as we look ahead, so what advancements in AI for public safety do you feel are on the horizon? Like, how would you answer that? Okay.
I'm going to keep saying, I've been saying robotics when people didn't believe me. And unfortunately, a war had to be started for us to realize the capabilities of robotics, right?
Right. Yeah.
But you remember
it's like
how
drone wars now.
Precisely. You remember when I told you in the beginning that even with 50 cameras, like the idea that you're going to have an army of people to be at the right place at the right time, it's ridiculous. It's not going to happen. So you need a force multiplier. Well, the same thing with these rovers, right? With rover guards and like guards that are just there for, deterrence or presence. Somebody sitting in the chair for 8 hours. Why? What service? What purpose do they serve? They can't intervene because it's illegal, right? Meaning that the only thing that they can do is actually call law enforcement, right? So those people still need to sleep. They need to eat. They need coffee. Same human factors that lead to inconsistencies of their deliverable on a daily basis for the people that watch the cameras apply in this case as well, right? So, okay, robots have challenges, stairs and elevators and stuff like that, right?
Right.
And,
for sure.
can they detect clear walls or windows. Well, will they just roll right through it because the
Mhm.
sensors are not picking that up as a
They don't
barrier?
know.
Exactly. But all of that can be solved, and all of that will be solved, right? And can you imagine what force multiplication using AI and robotics can do to physical security if all of a sudden we realize we start living in a world where the biggest operational expense of a enterprise security team is not people, because you just invest into hardware, and now you have the budgets for the most amazing professionals in customer service and all that stuff, and all of the monotonous tasks, the 80%, let's call it, is automated, and it has a lifespan of 5 years.
Instead of paying per hour for employee, it's teraflops per hour. So,
Mhm.
instead of tops per second, you're right, it's per hour now.
It's security that you don't see. It's security that you don't feel, with amazing customer service, right? People when you need them, but the rest, and it doesn't eat, it doesn't sleep, meaning that you always feel safe, you always feel taken care of, you always know that your property is taken care of, and many, many other benefits. And of course, I'm a big fan of it. That's one of the reasons why we started Volt. I love AI, I love robotics. I believe that they definitely make the world a better place if they're mission driven and they're done correctly, not as gadgets. Other people say, oh, this is ridiculous. There's so many problems with it. Well, that's the beauty of it. People have different opinions, but I really do see that the next big step, like AI is already getting into physical security. The next big step that is going to shock everyone, maybe not shock, but wow everybody, is going to be the robotics.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think there's a huge focus on the humanoids too. And like a lot of people wonder why they make them like us, and the world's made for us, and the world has been made by us. And so that we're building these things that can work and without a hitch. And so, yeah, I mean, I'm following that space pretty quickly also. And I'd imagine from a public safety perspective, imagine you having this resource officer or this robotics officer, on, your most crime prone corners of your city. And now it becomes the camera that does walk around. And it's one that can act in real time and do all and live, and it has to live in a 3D world. I remember when people were talking about, they alluded to how AGI would be singularity. And I was doubting that the whole time. I'm like, dude, AGI doesn't have a world perspective. It doesn't have world awareness. It doesn't understand 3D space. It's literally a 2D thing, right? So our cameras are 2D thing. So, and until the AI is able to understand the 3D world, the physical world that we live in, these robots will have a really hard time, and they'll be prone to maybe just rover an area that's fixed, or they're looking for specific things as opposed to being more general purpose and useful. But I'd imagine the public safety space, like you were saying, like they're going to benefit. And it's interesting that we actually transitioned to this, because I wasn't planning on that at all. That you had mentioned robots, but maybe it was meant to be. But it's it's going to be wild, man, to see. So when we look at new capabilities over the next 5 years, let's think about maybe getting away from robots and into, let's just call it the surveillance space. Your company is an expert in this space, in the surveillance space. So from your perspective, what should we expect, would you say, in the next 5 years in surveillance with regards to advancements in artificial intelligence, and maybe how that impacts public safety?
You can run your entire campus using one of these. You don't need to go to, as you know, many VMS manufacturers and others, they have entire courses. Hey, come and become certified in the use of our system. Why? Well, maybe now it's important because it's a very, I'm not saying they're bad systems. A lot of them are very, very good. They're just very complicated. And that's why it probably makes sense to go and learn about it. But I think it's unnecessary. Again, a 3-year-old can use this, right? We should be able to do better. Again, why do we need 25,000 different integrations, right? Why can't everything just live on one pane of glass? Why do we have to go and spend months configuring cameras, right? Why does anybody who's ever looked at, access control and try to dig into that understands what kind of a
Mhm.
nightmare that actually is? Why? We're able to design self-driving cars and planes. We can
But can't
absolutely
figure out.
fix. Yeah. Like we can't figure out how to. We're gonna spend 12 months, programming access control. Like, are you kidding me? Right? And this is where large language models and all that other good stuff comes into play. Meaning, why can't we have one system that understands that it's, well, physical security technology, let's just call it that. I want to remove the human component out of it. It's not that difficult. I mean, you have locks, you have sensors, you have battery, right? You have doors, you have
Inputs. Yeah.
cameras, you
Right.
have some sort of a notification system, be it, internal, external, or both. You have some sort of an out to like 911 call centers in certain cases, right? So tell me again why 80% can be essentially built into one seamless platform. That's a lot less things than other enterprise systems that we're using in finance and accounting and all that. They're a lot more complicated and they work seamlessly. So why do we need an RSM, a regional security manager, in every single major city or every single campus? Why can't there be like one person with a phone that is focused on problems that they need to focus on? Again, I'm removing the human aspect out of it. And I'm sure, some RSMs that if they listen to this, guys, I love you, you know how much I respect you and all that stuff. And I'm sure they'll tell me, you have no idea how difficult my job is because you've never done it. True, I've never done it. But I do believe that a lot of the tech that is built for physical security today, it's still being built with the mindset of let's build it for the former law enforcement and military people because they need to feel that a tool is tough and it's actually doing something in order for it to be effective. No, I want a tool that will do everything for me because I'm paying for it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. I have a piece that's going to come out probably in a month. And on that piece, it's going to talk about people as the AI orchestrator. And so I think there's certainly an argument. Obviously, AI will replace jobs, but we'll have a harder time replacing those people that know how to use it. And that's from Harvard, right? Anything I talk about is actually maybe a formulated opinion, but most of the time it's coming from other experts, right? Not my own. And so from that perspective, orchestration, what it would imply is that as the systems become more agentic, so they have short-term memory enhancement, they have the ability to take actions and use more reasoning models, AI models, that people could begin orchestrating them. So I wonder, and this is not really a question, but I think kind of trying to end on what you're saying, that, that to give those listeners some hope to say that, hey, like, yeah, it could replace your job, but at the same time, it's incumbent upon you to get ready to work with it. And the way this idea of human AI orchestration or agent orchestration would imply is that people would call up on those agents because there's going to be thousands of agents at companies that will automate all kinds of business workflows. And so they have to be able to recognize who to call on, which sounds very familiar going back to the earlier part of our discussion around leadership, right? So I need to know what I want, how I want. I think you're mentioning some of this, the who, what, when, how, right? And it will deliver the best results possible, as opposed to being, I guess, completely dependent on the tech. But we'll see, man. We'll see. Igor, it's been awesome talking to you, man. You've been a wealth of knowledge.
Likewise.
I couldn't be more pumped to have you on. But thanks for joining, and we'll get to soon.
I appreciate it. Thank you again for the opportunity. This was fun.